Welcome everybody to our DLM Coffee Break webinars. This is our first webinar in our monthly series, and we're really glad you could join us today. This video will be recorded and you'll have access to it after the webinar. Today our webinar is being sponsored by the DLM Dashboard, which is a new tool by Redgate. There's a free edition. It allows you to keep track of schema changes to your database and also get email alerts about any changes to your schema in your databases. If you stay on at the end of this webinar, we'll have a 10-minute demonstration by one of the software developers on that team, and he'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about this new free tool. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're talking about what exactly are we shipping and how to keep control in database continuous delivery. We'll start with some introductions to our panelists and then have a discussion. During this time, the attendees will be on mute. If you have any questions, there's a little questions panel in the GoToWebinar viewer. If you can type those questions in, we'll try to answer them throughout the discussion. And we'll also have some time at the end for any additional questions you might have. And then finally, we'll have a demo of the DLM dashboard. So let's go ahead and get started with our panelists. We have a special guest today, Brian Randell, who's with MCW Technologies and a Microsoft Visual Studio ALM MVP. So I'll go ahead and let Brian introduce himself.
Not much more to say. Just a big database geek, love databases, and glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Next we have Grant Fritchey, a Product Evangelist at Redgate. He's also a Microsoft SQL Server MVP. So Grant, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Not much to say. I'm a scary DBA, and I'm here to represent.
And finally, we have Steve Jones, editor of SQLServerCentral.com and also a Microsoft SQL Server MVP. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about
Stephanie. Maybe I'll say a little more. I've been working with SQL Server for 20 years, and I've had a bunch of different experiences working with big and small companies and delivering software. And so I think all three of us have some different perspectives on how we work with software, and I'm looking forward to debating and letting these guys know how wrong they are.
This is going to be a fun webinar.
So down the gauntlet already.
Excellent.
So my name is Stephanie Herr. I'm a product manager for Database Lifecycle Management at Redgate. I've been with the company for 6 years. So we'll get right into the heart of today's discussion, which is all about how do we know exactly what we're shipping and how to keep control in database continuous delivery. So I'd like to get started just by, we'll start with you, Brian. And if you could just talk a little bit more about what database continuous delivery is.
Well, fundamentally, we start thinking about the movement behind continuous delivery. We're facing the need for organizations to respond more quickly to change, right? Business wants to be more agile, to use that term, to be more adapted to customer demands. And for most organizations, your core line of business runs on top of some database. In this context, maybe it's SQL Server. And so we start thinking about how we get these changes out. One of the big problems we have is making sure that the changes we're trying to rapidly get into production don't screw things up. I mean, that's the number one fear that DBAs have, and even development teams, is that we're going to try and be more agile and deliver changes quickly, but what happens when we screw up? What happens? How do we prevent screwing up? So we really need to make sure that we know, A, what's going into our system, and that it's been properly vetted, and that we have a plan to roll forward or roll back when things change. So I think the big thing when it comes to control is making sure you're very confident about what you're putting in there, so there's a quality aspect, but also knowing exactly what is changing, right? It's knowing what got changed, so if you have to go backwards or try and fix things, you know what you're dealing with, not the, oh, we've got 50 different changes here. We updated 5 store procedures, I got some new views, and oh, hey, we decided to change this column structure. Someone didn't normalize correctly. So that's what I start thinking about it.
Grant, anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, the main point I would make in terms of delivery versus deployment is we want to automate everything that we're doing as much as we possibly can, but there is a difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. The main point being, let's automate it right up to production, but let's still protect production, maybe make that next step possibly automated, possibly manual, but let's give people a very high degree of comfort in what they're going to deploy is accurate.
That's a good point about making sure there's a protection around the production environment.
I agree with what you said. I also think, we're going to screw up. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to deploy the wrong code. We're going to deploy previous versions, or we're going to put out something that's not ready. We're going to have problems, and so, to me, that continuous delivery thing needs to be better engineered so that when we do make mistakes, we can correct them quickly. There's a lot of people that look to roll back, like Brian said, you want to have something there, but there's plenty of people that go, we're only rolling forward. If we make a mistake, we're going to stay up all night, we're going to fix it and just roll it forward. So, kind of having a process that we can do that quickly in is what's important, because, face it, we've all done continuous delivery right now, right? We log into production and we just change stuff whenever we need to, which is not the kind of continuous delivery we want to do that. We want it to be, we want to know what versions of things are going and be able to easily deploy things that we've tested and we have some, manageability and traceability around.
Yeah, and I think another big issue is scale. When you think about where continuous delivery really got its legs, it was in the open source community and these more, what I would call, I want to use simple in the term that they're focused on a particular thing. Let's take Flickr as an example, the poster child for continuous delivery. Flickr had a focus on a single thing, which was photo sharing, right? But we start thinking about what a lot of people have line of business software. They have databases that have been around 20, 30 years. They may have evolved from different systems. One of the big things I did in the late 80s and 90s was migrate from HP 3000s onto Windows databases, as well as Oracle, and doing that kind of stuff. And so you're talking about data schemas that have been around a long time that possibly have terabytes of data. That type of model is going to change how you think about continuous delivery, in that you might think about continuous delivery at the database level separate from continuous delivery to the app level. Right, when you have smaller applications where, I have a gigabyte of data, big deal. You can back up that entire thing quickly, and you have the whole thing there. But when you're talking terabytes, you're talking large schemas that impact 50, 100 applications. That changes the way you do it. And what Grant said, it's like, maybe I get to the point where I've really got to be monitoring at a very detailed level to the point I'm sitting there watching it and doing the changes with it. So scale I think, is another big issue with databases.
So it's actually interesting you guys brought up about, knowing what you're changing where and how do you keep track of all this stuff, which is something that we hear a lot from our users about. How do you keep track of what's going where, and this idea of traceability through your systems. Can you guys talk a little bit more about that? And we'll kick it off with Brian again.
Okay. Well, as an ALM guy, it starts with having some kind of process, knowing what's going in your system. So you need some kind of methodology, and whether that's, little a, big A, agile, it's mostly, don't get caught up on what you're calling it. Be more focused on what you're doing, which is knowing, A, why am I making a change, who's doing it, and what are the safety checks around that. And so it's having some kind of process, some kind of flow. Kanban's really good for this, where you start looking at, okay, this is a change that's to be done. Here's the things that go along with it. What's your definition of done? And knowing who's done that, but also being able to associate those changes. That's why having things like version control around your database changes is critical. So you can see this is exactly what was changed when, and then have it associated with some kind of work tracking system to say this is why it was done. And then hopefully, if you have the right automation tools, that traceability flows all the way through, and that a build can say, here are all the changes that went into this build, here's who made them, here's why, and if necessary, I can go back and get a diffgram of exactly what was changed in a stored procedure, a table definition, etc.
It's interesting that you bring up process as the first thing that you would talk about, because one of the really common things out nowadays is, talking about Agile. And Agile, one of the tenets of Agile is people over process. And I'm kind of famous for saying I don't trust anyone. Hey, I'm a DBA. So I do have a tendency to trust process over people, while recognizing that it's people that run the process and it's people who determine the process. And so while saying that we do want a good process and that we're after that kind of thing, I mean, and it's vital that we get that, it is still recognizing the fact that human beings are involved with it, which means both that, well, we still don't trust you guys, but it's that you're going to have to make adjustments to that process. The human beings involved are going to have to make decisions on, okay, in this case we can't do an automation, or in this case we must do more automation, we must get a better automated process around it. And you're really dependent upon the people involved to make the process work. It's not simply, I mean, I'm not questioning what you said, I'm agreeing with what you said, but it's not just the process, it's getting those people engaged so to make that process work.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. You know, in my history, when I've tried to implement some type of Agile methodology, whatever we want to call that, we always have to get the people moving first, because if people don't buy in, then everything fails. You know, all we do is argue about things a lot. So I do think that it is important to get people to buy in, whether you really have any process or it's simple as people just logging things somewhere, you know, in a public folder or in a wiki or something like that. As long as they're just logging things that they do, that gives me the first step. However, I also think I need tools. You know, as a DBA, I don't trust anybody like Grant, so I need auditing. I need mechanisms that I can go back and check things, because if somebody forgets while they're learning the process, I need a way to figure out what happened. So, right. You know, it's kind of this combination of everything. To me, process is really the end goal, but there's a lot of things to get started ahead of that, which starts with really people and me not trusting anybody.
but it really,
the problem with, go ahead, Grant.
No, you go.
I was just going to say the problem with people that I'll get back to is that, you know, you have the great oral history, the rich oral history about how things are done, right? And so one of the mistakes people make is that, hey, Grant's the one who knows how to do it, but what happens when Grant gets run over by the ubiquitous software bus? You know, how do we get things into production? And so, yeah, I want I only want the amount of process that's necessary. That's why I think things like Kanban are really great, because it's very thin layer. It's just enough to keep track. It's visible. It's public. But it goes back at the end of the day, you know, when we talk about delivery, automation is the real key point, because it can be repeated, it can be traced, and it's something that can, once it's working, when it breaks because of some change to the environment generally, not because that script was changed.
Right. Well, I mean, and traceability and automation actually go completely hand in hand. I mean, you want, you know, as a DBA, I want to know what changes are coming into my system. I want to know what changes came into my system. And manual processes are going to take away traceability, right? If too many people, and believe me, I've been in this experience, if too many people have SA, you've got no idea what's going on. You have no idea who's making what changes, when they're getting made. Whereas if you've got an automated process and it's pulling from a known source, you should have a higher degree of traceability, not less. So it should make DBAs more comfortable, not less. It should make DBAs like jumping onto this instead of running from it.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. I mean, but you just have to, right, we always know that people are going to circumvent the process. Something breaks today, somebody's going to say, log into production, make a change. So
I'm the first one to do that.
Yeah, that's where you really have to, people have to have that habit and that process. Like, you know, long ago, it took only weeks for me to beat it into all the DBAs that worked for me that if you have to make an emergency change, stick it in Notepad on the desktop of the server so that we know at least what you did. You know, if you've got to put a script, just put a script down there and say, here's what I ran, so that if you get hit by, what did Brian call it, the ubiquitous software bus, that, you know, when I come into work tomorrow, I can figure out what happened if it didn't fix the problem.
Right.
You know, certainly the end goal is always that we should have stuff automated, right? Always hits a development server first, and it rolls through to test and production and everything else. But it's hard to get there, right?
It's funny you bring that up, and I think there's what we want to do and the reality, and I think something you said was very telling, Steve, about the Notepad file that really makes me think about how to solve the problem with Grant, which is No, in other words, it's going to happen, right? As much as we want, we dream of these things, right? I go in and help people with their process and Agile and that stuff. And I always, especially Scrum. We're doing Scrum, but, so it's the joke in the industry, oh, you do Scrum, but, right? You don't completely do it. So let's go, let's do a reality check and say, we know, because I saw one of the questions come up in the chat, how long does it take to implement? Well, it depends on your organization. It starts with your people, right? How do you get them to buy into it? You work out what it is, and then you get the tooling in place. But one of the things that's changed is look at this webinar. We are all on video. You now can put little tools. There's a variety of out there from free to paid tools like Camtasia, to where next time you do a change in production that requires you do it manually, why not record a video of it, right? Have some of the tools there. In other words, we have ways to do things. Some of the problems we have is some of our tools don't have great trace points behind the scenes. And like Grant said, if you have SA, the things you can do to the system, are limitless. But if you're doing it manually, at least maybe record a video of what you're doing so you have that as well as your notes. Because the other thing is, I don't know about you, but I often screw up my notes. I forget one of the steps. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot that little step between drop table, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's an interesting, I've never thought about using Camtasia there. It feels like there's overhead, but certainly I agree with you, right? One of the problems with doing any of this manually is that we forget what we did. I've watched people run 3 things and write down 2. Over and over and over again, which is, I've always been a big fan of, you've got to do everything in a command line environment, whether that's a query window or, just at the command line where we can, save that off, right? We can make sure that we know exactly what happened. And, hopefully the idea of building process and tools allows us to do that in a way that makes everybody more comfortable over time. I know when I've automated things over time, it makes a huge difference to everybody being more comfortable with deployment.
Right.
So what are some of the things that you want to trace when it comes to the database?
Everything. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you want to trace?
I mean, who did what to who, right? I mean, it.
Well, and it starts with why. Why are you making a change, number one, right? I think that's the big thing is, we don't, I know Grant wants to stay employed, so he's got to act like he's doing something when he's playing DBA. But fundamentally, right, why are you making changes, right? So that should be traced back to some customer need, right? Delivering value to the customer should be why you're doing it. Whether it's, now Grant, we have maintenance and things like that that keep things going, but we think about changes, right? I'm going to create a new view. Why? I need a new store procedure. We need to change the store procedure because, tax rates changed or whatever, those type of things. We need to know why. So we need to know why the changes, what are we changing, and then what's the possible ripple effect through the system that's going to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think tracing back to requirements is great, if you've got a big process, but that's so hard to do sometimes when somebody says, let's add a field to the web page, right? And that rolls into, I need a new sort procedure change, which maybe require a schema change or support or a data update and a bunch of stuff behind the scenes. Ultimately, you hope you have some sort of system like the work items in TFS, or you've got some sort of project management system where you're tagging these requirements with an easy number that we can say, hey, this is all these changes are per this one request. But that's hard to do, and I saw something recently where somebody had kind of faulted some developers for putting that stuff in comments because it moves the information somewhere else. You say it's per this request, 25, and now the next developer coming along has no idea what that really means, especially over time, right? It's one thing if you're working on a project, but across years, that's tough.
Well, but that's why good tooling makes sense, right? If you have a system TFS does a good job. When I make a check-in, I have the ability to associate, and I get traceability both ways. I can look at it from the source code view and go back to the requirement, the work item that was requested, or from a more project management perspective, I can come down from the requirement, the PBI, the user story, and I can see it that way. So once again, this is where it's tooling. It's a combination of tooling process, and then yes, the people have got to use it correctly. That's probably the big mistake, right? Is people aren't properly trained. That's one of the big problems I run into. Companies will spend thousands upon hundreds of thousands of dollars on software, but they won't get the education for their people to say, oh, well, we bought this magic tool because the vendor said it's going to make all your problems go away, but then they don't adequately train it and implement it. So I would say, at least in the case of TFS, because that's what I spend all my time with and Visual Online, we have that, but getting people to use it is a key point.
Is that the magic tool? Do we have magic tools?
I don't know. The magic's scary. Scary.
I love magic.
Yeah, you just get it to work consistently. It'd be great.
But this goes back to Grant. People, and Steve, we are right about that. I mean, got to see the three of us in a room for a week.
Yeah. Well, I do like that you said source code control, because I think that's one of those things where, apart from the DBA side of just auditing stuff and being aware of that, putting stuff in source control to me has always kind of been that fundamental area where I can go at least say, all right, here's what it used to look like, here's what it looks like now. Even if I'm not quite sure why something changed, at least I can figure out what changed. I can always look at source control at some point in time, or look through versions of a stored procedure or table and compare that to the database and try to figure out, what did somebody decide to do for some reason. And to me, as you're getting people to go, source control is really the place where I always start trying to get some control of an environment. At least then I know.
Well, it's really it's a foundation point, right? I mean, because if you walk into an organization, my source of the truth starts with production, right? That's where I go to find the truth, and then for production, I go and look. That's why SQL Compare is so awesome. Is I go and I can say, okay, show me what I think I have under source control of this, or if I don't have it at all, obviously then the first step is getting under version control. But it's managing that drift. I think that's a big thing. Once again, going back to this root discussion of traceability, right? Is how do I know what's changed? Well, one time is just saying we have two possible views of the truth. At the end of the day, production is always the truth, and then getting that to match what development people are making changes to is critical. And that one tool right there alone, take about everything else we talked about, just source control will save you a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're going to talk about database dashboard later, but that's really one of those things that helps, because I see so often where production is constantly changing, not quite in the way development is changing, which is always an interesting problem to deal with.
So we had a question from Larry. We're talking a lot about database changes and schema changes. I think there was also a mention of data as well, but he's asking about SSIS package changes.
Why is there always somebody asking that?
Always. That is.
Don't you guys get paid enough to do SSIS? Just deal with it. SSIS is hard, man. That is. I really do fault Microsoft for building a very poor format to store that data in, and that they've embedded metadata, visual display, UI information, all kinds of crap in the package, along with all my code, and it's not easy for me to separate those out and then easily figure out what differences are. That was really kind of a short-sighted architecture for putting packages together. I don't know how you deal with SSIS. Really, I think that's why we pay a lot of money for SSIS developers, because you're going to have to just look at two packages, and you're going to have to just try to figure out what.
That's where it really is. It's a process, because there's no tool. The tooling around it is you're writing custom stuff, because Microsoft hasn't solved the problem. No. If they can't do it with their billions of dollars, the average team is going to be able to invest the tools and timing, because you're dealing with that, as you said, Steve, the metadata, the visual stuff all together. It is a continuous response of I'm sorry whenever someone asks that question, because I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah, so Mickey Stu actually said Bimmel, and Bimmel is, I think, maybe the solution, but I'm not sure if Bimmel covers all of the stuff you need. Plus, it doesn't help you with all the packages that exist right now.
Right, yeah. and I mean, I don't know if Bimmel works well with source control or not. And if it works well,
it could, because it's just source files,
Okay.
That sounds like
has to. She says it's XML, but then you've got to be able to have a comparison between two versions of it that you can actually understand.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I'm saying, with Bimmel,
that's like.
But Bimmel looks more like. I hate to say it's more like procedural programming, because you see a lot of stuff kind of lining up. I'll see, here is where I'm working with the data flow, here's where I'm working with connections. It's more lined up, and it doesn't include all the visual stuff that you typically get in an SSIS package, right? So if I drag something or move something, I drop it and redo it, and I get IDs changed in my XML. The format for SSIS is just a mess, because it's a mishmash of stuff I care about and stuff I don't.
I think we could have a whole separate section on SSIS packages.
Yeah, got a short one.
So we were talking about
Not
source
one with
control. We were talking about source control earlier, and Mickey also brought up a question about source control with large offshore dev teams. So I think that's really interesting because we do talk to a lot of users that are, distributed teams and working, remotely. So
Well,
can you guys give any advice about traceability and source control in that area?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, large offshore teams, source control, yes, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of source control is it's a communication mechanism within your team. You got 3 guys sitting in a room. They don't really need to have source control except to have some mechanism of institutional memory over time. And even that, they might remember, oh God, remember last year when I was making that change? Yeah, I think it, but you've got a team spread out, they're on the other side of the building, let alone on the other side of the planet. Source control is your mechanism for communicating with those people, and yeah, you've got to use it. Now, as far as implementing it goes, then you get the whole issue of working, you've got to work incrementally to get the institution to understand that, yes, in fact, we need source control because, yes, we need to communicate with these guys because, yes, the communication right now sucks, and stuff's getting into the system that we don't know it's coming in, and it's breaking other things, and, it's adding to our overall workload. So if we could just communicate a little bit better, and, hey, by the way, source control is the communication mechanism, let's get it implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what Brian said, I think source control or version control is the magic tool overall, right? It really is. And the one word you could use to really describe it is Linux. I mean, that thing has really been built by hundreds and thousands of people all around the world that communicate and work together in a very distributed fashion with no idea what other people are doing and making that come together. And I think that's where you need source control as your version of the development truth, but you need a lot of training so that people understand how to use it, how often they need to pull stuff and sync up, how often they need to branch, how they put that stuff back together in merges. There's a lot of training that takes place around source control, and it's not a one-day class, right? It's not a one-week class. It's over time across weeks and months that you have to build habits and teach people how to use that tool so that they can stay in it's a contact, but in awareness of what everybody else is doing.
Well, and you got to be careful too, depending upon there's what people think is best for them as, say, a developer, but what's best for the organization. When you use Git as an example, people, using Linux as an example, yes, it's very good for distributed, disconnected work, but it's designed around a particular level of trust. Right? The source code's open.
Yep, absolutely.
You might not want your offshore team to take your entire schema, all your stored procedures, all lock, stock, and barrel offline. That's why using, say, centralized version control might be a better example for the company. So once again, I think, Steve, you hit the nail on the head. It's not something you just casually do. It requires training from a mechanic standpoint, but also buy-in from the top down of the organization on what's best for the company, particularly when you're dealing with contractors, people like that. One of the distinctions, get when I do a clone, I'm cloning the entire repo. I get all the history, I get everything, right? Whereas with other like centralized version control like TFS VC, I have the ability to say, no, you only get part of the source tree. You only have access to this branch as an example. So, once again, it requires thought. You don't just willy-nilly do it.
No, I agree. I'm not sure it's that bad to give people the ability to pull history and repos. I think it's more important that whoever owns the final decision on what gets pushed to production or goes through your process, I think that's where you have to control it. But I know we're just starting to get late here. Stephanie, I know there's a lot of questions. Do you want to just pick some, choose some, keep us on track?
No, it was an interesting discussion. So, Brian, I think you mentioned about TFS. Do you have any recommended training or where to go to help for this? This was a question from Owen.
Yeah, if you want, there's you can do online training with a Pluralsight, and then there's a number of partners like myself that offer hands-on training at your location. So you can ping me on Twitter or send me email, and I can provide more information. But those are the two places I go. And, of course, I've written a book on Visual Studio 2013 and Team Foundation Server 2013. And if we're going to ask for one more, and I'm currently finishing up a course on
book. I don't have it here. It's upstairs.
Yeah, where's my book? I don't even have my own copy because I'm on the road. Come on, Stephanie, I gave you a copy too. There it is. Yay!
Right on my desk.
The bottom line is, obviously, the Internet Stack Overflow, Pluralsight. You can try out that. There's TFS training. There's a Visual Studio Online course coming, and you can hire a number of different partners to help you if you want on in-person training at your organization.
Yeah, I would say pick something organized though, because it's too easy to kind of just wander the internet. You know, I would say pick up like Brian's book or Pluralsight, or pick a class that organizes you and just gets you moving. But understand it's going to take time to actually get it going.
Well, the initial time, getting a database in the source control is a snap. It's, again, it goes back to process. Getting the process built takes a lot of time.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Don't be scared of the work. The work's easy. The process is a bear.
We have another question from Brian, something we were talking about earlier about recovering and rolling forward. So how do you actually do this when data is involved? For example, if you drop a column, how do you recover from that to re-add it when the data is no longer in the database?
Well, like I say, right, good backup, good resume, Brian, you just need one of them. Whichever one you want is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing to say. I mean, if you've dropped a column, if you've dropped data, then you've got to have a place to recover that from. So in that situation, it's not a roll forward.
Yeah, well, you can roll forward in that you can have a backup of stuff and move it back. So Brian, the really high availability databases that have run for decades that people have to do this stuff in, what they typically do is any type of schema change, a split, a combine, a drop, an add, any of those things aren't made in a deployment. Those changes are made across months or across a year. So if I'm going to drop a column, what I first have to do is I actually have to mirror the table, or I have to make an extra column and I have to keep that data around for a significant period of time. Usually it's a year because we typically run on yearly cycles. And then I drop that column, but I have another copy that I keep in the database for a year, and then I have to do a second part of the deployment in a year where I actually finally remove the data. But
Right.
all during a year, I have to have triggers or other mechanisms to make sure that if I move data in my source table around, it moves it around in my copy as well. So continuous development or deployment doesn't necessarily help there, except that you potentially could have a deployment scheduled for a year that is going to do the second part of whatever you're going to do.
Right. I've got one other on the training thing, and it's kind of bad that I forgot this, but there is one other place you can go to get the training, and that's redgate.com/training. We have a bunch of actually database lifecycle management workshops, including source control. So you might want to check that out.
But does it have TFS yet? Do we have that online
It's not
yet?
TFS specific, no.
Right. So I was being more literal in the question. So yes, that is correct. The DLM, and by the way, I was recently in the class. The DLM training on source control is really great. You get a lot of great experience, even though it's not TFS specific yet.
Right.
But that is good training. I did that a couple weeks ago with Ike. That was a lot of fun.
With Ike, oh yeah, Ike's awesome.
Yeah, Ike was great.
I was there too. You forget about me.
Yeah, Ike's awesome.
Yes. Well, you were the cameraman though, right? You weren't really working. Oh, sorry.
I answered a couple questions, I think.
So is there any kind of good strategy you would recommend to users for database lifecycle management and keeping this traceability?
So apart from using specific tools, obviously Redgate makes a bunch of tools. There's other tools out there. I think that the key to any kind of strategy is that at every step, from the time you get a requirement to the time that you put it in source control and you then send it to test and you send it to user acceptance and get ready to deploy it, you have to script everything and keep track of those scripts so that you know what's changing or what's being moved forward. How you do that, what tools you use to help that out is fine, but whether it's Notepad or something else, you just have to keep track of everything in a scripted fashion. There can never be an instruction that says, click this button in the upper left-hand corner of the GUI. That's not a way to enable traceability at all.
Right.
So, do you guys have any kind of advice? This is a question from Owen about handling the difference between a UI version and the database version when there might be 10 different UI versions that are compatible with the database. So I guess this might be for different customer sets where the UI might be tweaked for them, but they're all hitting the same backend database. So any kind of advice for dealing with a situation where you have multiple apps and one backend database?
I would assume you're going to have to go with relational storage, right? I mean, it's a many-to-many relationship. This version of the database is related to these versions of the app. This version of the database is related to those versions of the app. It's a tracking mechanism more than a deployment process. That's a tracking process that you'll have to put together.
Yeah, I mean, I would think Brian might have more ideas, but I think you have to. Your application has to handle the database being rolled slightly forward or backward. So if I add columns, you can't break the system. So for database people, we have to use defaults, right? We have to handle not perfect data coming in when it could come from multiple applications. For the application, you have to handle the fact that the database may roll forward. It may have more things in the database than you have, so you can't be selecting and using, column 1, column 2, column 3 in your code.
Yes. Right? Or select star. I mean, it's stuff like that's is going to bite you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Fundamentally, for years, the way we would handle this is you handle this as some kind of mid-tier application layer. First of all, you define the notion of data dictionary, so you have a notion of what data elements are mapped into your data system, and then when you bring those into memory, you have to have some kind of versioning mechanism that says these are the fields and the elements that go together to form this version of the data dictionary, and then present that. And people have done all sorts of things where they use XML definitions that are then mapped to the UI. So depending on the version you get screens. I mean, there's lots of ways to handle it, but it's non-trivial and it requires an architecture from the beginning.
Could you guys talk about some of the problems if you don't have traceability in place?
What was that, Steve? Resume? Good resume?
Good backup, good resume.
I mean, I work for a company that every single person had SA privileges, up to and including the receptionist. And horror shows is what happens. I mean, people drop stuff, people delete stuff. I didn't know this, but in SQL Server 6.5, you can drop tempdb. And I found that out because one of our sales guys said, "Oh my gosh, we have temporary stuff in our server. Let's get rid of it," and dropped tempdb. I mean, and that was a 2-day outage for me to learn how to recover a tempdb loss because I didn't know how at the time. I mean, so it's. I can give you long lists of the horrors that are going to occur when you don't know who's making what change. You don't know which change came from, and you're spending as much time trying to track down, well, how the heck did this happen to our system, as much as you are fixing whatever it was. Because if it's something automated, if it's something automatically making changes to your system and you don't know about it, and you fix it manually, what's to prevent it from automatically coming in and helping you a second time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd go back and say, apart from all the really bad stuff that can certainly happen, like dropping tempdb, which is somebody has done to me as well, it's really the simple stuff, I think, the minor changes that people make where they think they're fixing something and they don't quite understand the problem, and so they break something else. It creates this instability in your application that isn't going to cause your business to fail. What it's really going to cause is people to just be upset with you or to not trust you, and they're not going to want to make other changes, or they're not going to believe that you can do it, or they're not going to think that you deserve to be the DBA any longer or the developer, because when you aren't keeping track of what you're doing, at some point you're going to make mistakes and you're going to not know exactly what happened. And while you try to figure out, you waste time. You're not doing other work, and you're just kind of ruining the reputation for all of us that work in technology, that we're a bunch of idiots that can't run systems. Because unlike the telephone or the water, those things just work most of the time. I guess not with cell phones anymore, but usually you pick up the one with the cord on it, it works. So not kind of putting a process in place, to me it's just unprofessional. It's just embarrassing to not know what's happening.
So we're reaching the end of our discussion. We still have 10 minutes of Q&A, but just to kind of wrap a few things up, wanted to go through each of our panelists and just have a top tip or something to take away from today's discussion.
Brian.
I wasn't going to call on Brian this time, but Grant did it for me.
Start with me? Okay.
Yeah, start with you.
So my top tip would be just start using source control, right? I'm sure some of you out there do it, but many of you don't. Even application developers don't. Just use it. Almost all the tools integrate with source control on the development side. Redgate's got a great plugin to do it on the database side, but even if you just have to save scripts and put them in source control, it's really not that hard. I manage a team of 10 developers that use source control, and we all had to do file save and file open from Management Studio to make it work. And after a few weeks, it's just habit, and it works really, really well. But that, at least, as Brian said, gives you that foundation on which you can build everything else.
Grant?
Nuts. He took mine. I would say that after you've done what Steve has said, and I'm absolutely an advocate for that, get your stuff in source control. Just do it. I would say start the process of experimenting with CI and start small. Just start tiny. Set up your own private little CI server that will take your database out of source control and build a blank copy of your database in some server off on the side and let that run for a while. And find out that you can automate your database deployments if at a very simple way. And then once you've automated that stuff, then you can start to add in testing and other types of auditing and all that fun stuff that comes out of a full-blown DLM process. Just start small, start tiny, and assure yourself that you can get these things done. And you will be able to very quickly, and then build from there.
So my tip would be a test a day. I think, I definitely agree with Steve and Grant. Starting small is great. You got to have source control, and I think coming up with automated testing. Because one of the reasons we want as a DBA to look at what's going into production is because we don't trust it. Why don't we trust it? Because we're concerned about quality. And so testing, and particularly automated testing, is a great way. And there's frameworks out there for doing it at the database level. There's tooling you can do on top of it. But even if it's manual testing, is make sure you've got some process of repeatable regression testing to know that if we put these changes, what are the critical things we expect to be consistent in the database? And so start thinking about testing. Testing isn't a bad word for developers or DBAs. It's meant for all of us. We're all responsible for quality. So I would say start looking at your test rigor.
That actually comes into some of the questions that are coming into our audience, and I wanted to back up for a second and just talk about how continuous integration fits in with continuous delivery.
Well, the idea behind continuous integration, where this came out of in the late 90s, early 2000s, was in monolithic software development. We often had this thing where people would work on parts of the application, and then weeks later you would try and bring it together. And when you did that, you'd have to deal with integration pain, which was the problem where things didn't work. In the world of COM, right, we had the issue where someone changed an interface and that definition wasn't put out there. In the case of databases, someone's decided that they're going to redesign the table layout and hasn't told the person who wrote the store procedure, it hasn't told the person who's written the data access layer. And so CI is all about the fact that when a change is made to something, a database definition, an object, and it goes into version control, the next step is you build around it. You have some automated process that brings all those bits together and runs smoke tests, sanity checks, typically unit tests are a good example of this, around them to say, hey, you made this change, did it break anything? And the key thing is these are single changes. I made one change. I changed this table definition. Check it in. Run it through the test. So CI is that foundation. And you might do hundreds of CI builds or changes a day, and that eventually leads to a delivery of a unit of work.
Right. And the other thing is that it acts as an initial point of creating an artifact, because when you go to create a CI deployment, you can have it create a NuGet package or a T-SQL script that it uses for its deployment, and assuming that deployment is successful, you can actually pick up that NuGet package or T-SQL script and use it for your QA deployment or your financial testing deployment or whatever. I mean, so it acts as an initial mechanism for beginning the process of automating your deployments. But the main point of it is testing. It has added functions.
Yeah, I would agree. Really, it's the second step in building continuous deployment or delivery, right? First is source control, I need that. Next is CI, and CI is really all the things that Brian said that we do. Those are to get around human frailty. Because if I ask you every single time you make a change to recompile the application and run these tests and make sure you run all of them and do smoke tests, you'll forget. Most of the time you might do it, but sometimes you'll forget. The CI just gets around that by doing it automatically for you. So make sure that every developer, when the change is made, all the tests, all the stuff that we've built across months and weeks and years gets run so that we're sure that it goes.
We have a question from Joe, which I think is very unique to database CI. That is not something you don't find from, application continuous integration. And this is all about, when you're building a database from source control, how do you handle keeping the user data? So, if you're doing CI and deploying to a test environment, that test team doesn't want to lose their data after build and deploy. So what is the solution there?
Well, fundamentally, your test data should be, I like to apply the idea of acidity in transactions to test data, right? For a test to be consistent, you have to start with known inputs and expect known outputs. One of the mistakes testers want to do is they build up this corpus of test data that they like to use, but it's actually dirty because it's been used for weeks. What you need to do is have some type of automated data loading, some data generation that can be a combination of known fact data and then sample data. And so it's just a matter of doing restores or reloads, start as low as BCP and go up from there to all sorts of other things. Redgate makes tools around this. The bottom line is you need to have your corpus of known baseline data that you agree has things like account numbers or products and those things, and then you layer that on top with sample data, and then your tests work against that. So I think the big thing is to make sure that the sample data has a known good consistency at a base level. That's probably the big mistake. People say, well, we don't want to lose my test data. Well, your test data is a year old. It's full of crap. How does it help you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that exact case where testers keep going, well, I have this data, but then they run tests, they run the application against it, and things change, and they're not cognizant of exactly what's changed, even though they think the data is the same. It's not. Ultimately, this is why you have process, right? The ultimate way that this happens is the tester says, I'm ready to test. We take the CI build, we restore a known set of data from a database, right? We restore a database from production or a known set. We then use a diff tool like SQL Compare. We apply all the changes from our CI environment, all the changes that are going in this deployment get applied to that database, and testers can go. And the next day, if they need to do it again, we do the same thing. We restore again. We grab the latest batch of changes, and we send them on there. And as long as it's automated, we can be sure that we have a known good set of things. But as Brian said, it's far too easy for testers to think they have a known set of data that really isn't a known set of data. It's changing all the time. If they forget what's changed, then they may correctly or incorrectly generate false or positives or negatives.
But just in case people aren't reading the form, because I gave Joe an answer as well, he was asking about CI, and the one thing I would say on CI is I would separate that from your development and from your testing. Have that CI process test its own builds in its own space. Don't have it go against a place where other people are working, because frankly the CI build is going to fail a lot, and the last thing you want it to do is stop other work. Right? It's not supposed to. It's supposed to help you, not hurt you.
Correct. Those CI tests should be small unit tests. They should not be with large amounts of test data your testers have. These are automated tests only.
You want CI builds to be super fast is the key
Really
thing.
fast.
Otherwise, developers won't do it. Developers will avoid checking it because the CI build takes too long. CI builds need to be fast, efficient, and then that's why we have nightly builds, integration builds, longer builds that do more strenuous testing.
Yeah, you need that quick feedback from the CI build so you know if something's broken right away and you can get on it instead of finding out down the road.
Exactly.
Great. So I really appreciate everybody's time today, and the panelists. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the questions. Any questions that we didn't get to, we'll try to follow up with you afterwards. If you guys have any additional questions, I'm just putting up our email. You can reach us at dlm@redgate.com. And again, we'll send around a link with a recording to this webinar. But first, I'm going to hand over the controls to Tom Hodgson, our software engineer on our DLM dashboard team. And he's going to give us a quick demo of the DLM dashboard and how it can help with some of the things we were talking about today, about having traceability and being able to understand your changes to your database.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi, Tom.
So I'm Tom Hodgson. I work on the DLM dashboard team here at Redgate, and I'm going to spend a few moments walking you through our product. And we talked today about traceability, and the panelists have mentioned leaving a text file on the desktop or videoing the changes you make, and we built DLM dashboards so you don't have to do that. I think one of the comments I heard was, we want to know who changed what. And that's exactly what the DLM dashboard does for us. So for the purposes of this demo, we're going to pretend that I'm a DBA at an online shopping company. And it's my responsibility to oversee two databases, development and production. And the process at this particular company is that when we want to add a new feature, the dev team work first on the development database. And when they're happy with it, they come to me. And if I'm happy with it, I promote it to the production database. And the database is the live database that all our customers see. So this is quite a simplified deployment process for the purpose of this demo, but everything I show you is equally applicable to any automated system of deploying your databases. And it's about seeing the schema changes that happen, whether they're inside your process or outside your process. So the first thing that the DLM dashboard gives me, it gives me a visual oversight of my databases in real time. So I can see right now that my development database is in the v1.1 state, and so is my production database. And this particular state corresponds to the last schema, the last feature we added. It's the first name feature. So I'm going to go live now, and like everything else these days, my day as a DBA begins by checking my emails. And I can see that I've received an email from the development team. And the development team are excited. They've finished the next feature, which is the surname feature, and they've asked me to deploy it to production. So the first thing I'm going to do is go and have a look at my DLM dashboard. So what I can immediately see is that the DLM dashboard is telling me that the online shopping development database has drifted. And what we mean by drifted is that it's changed from the schema that we thought it was at. So before it was at the 1.1 first name feature version schema, and now it's drifted to something unrecognized. But this isn't unusual. The dev team have just emailed me to tell me this and to approve it. So the next thing I want to do is have a look at the changes and see what's happened. So when I review it, I get a brief summary of who's changed it. Dev Steve's made a change to a table, and it shows me exactly what's happened. I can see that he's added a column called surname. It tells me when he did it, it tells me who did it, it even tells me the software that he used to do it. And this looks reasonable to me, so I'm going to name this schema. And what naming the schema means is that the DLM dashboard from now on will know about this schema. And whenever it sees it, it can refer to it by name, and I know what that name corresponds to. I also need to comment on the changes. I need to say why it's on this database at this given point in time. So in naming this state and commenting on why it's on that database, I'm telling the DLM dashboard all about it. So from now on, the DLM dashboard tells me that the database is in this v1.2 state, which is great. And I'm happy with it, but the devs asked me to deploy it to production. So that's what I'm going to do now. And for the purpose of the demo, keep it simple. I'm just going to use SQL Compare. It's a great handy tool. And this merely tells me that the difference between development and production is this missing column as I expect. So I'm going to quickly use compare to deploy that across. Now when I go back to the DLM dashboard will recognize that this change has been made. And there it goes. Now this time it doesn't tell me in red because it's not as dangerous. It's seen this state before, it knows about it. So it's merely telling me that this state v1.2 surname that it's seen before in development is now on my production database. Even though it knows about the state, I have to review about why it's on this database at this given point in time. So we'll do that. And acknowledge those changes. And once again, the DLM dashboard now tells me in clear, green, happy states that both of my databases are in v1.2 surname. And this is great because it gives me visual indication that my deployment has worked as I expected it to work. So this is where the fun begins, because up to now this is great. It gives me a real live, up-to-date version of my database so I can see exactly what's going on, which is great. And what I knew about those changes, I was deploying them. So what the really interesting stuff happens now is when I continue my daily work as a DBA and I refresh my emails, and I find a new email in my inbox. And this one's from the DLM dashboard, and it's telling me that my online shopping production has drifted. And this has happened since I made that deployment, so I sort of hurriedly open up this email. And I get confirmation again that it was in the 1.2 surname state, but it's drifted to something unrecognized. It gives me a brief summary of who did it, but I want to know more, so I immediately go to the DLM dashboard. And here we are, again, confirmation that my production database has drifted. And this is very worrying. This is as bad as life gets for a DBA. This is a live system that customers see. And again, I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to review and get a good detail of this change. And I can see that my dev Steve has he's added a not no constraint to an existing column. And it shows me the code. He's done it with some .NET code when he did it. Now the point of this, I know this straight away now. I've been told this as soon as it happens. So I can go and talk to Dev Steve, and I can go find out what's going on. It's this accountability, this traceability that now exists among my databases. So generally what happens in this situation is you go talk to the dev and they say, yeah, it was a mistake. I was gathering some statistics and I've accidentally brought the wrong server, so forth. But that's fine. I'm less mad than usual because I find out straight away, and my responsibility of a DBA is just quickly revert this change, get it back to how I want it to be. So again, I'm going to quickly use SQL compare to revert this change that's happened to my production server. So now when I go back to the DLM dashboard, once again, the DLM dashboard in real time live has picked up that that database has changed, and I can be happy again, relieved that it's back in the v1.2 surname feature. Again, the databases have changed, so I need to review because these changes have happened. So when I click review, I get another good breakdown, another good traceability about what's happened to my database. I can see that an object's been rolled back. I can see that Dev Steve did it using some C# code, and I can see that the DBA has reverted those changes using Redgate SQL compare. So I'll quickly comment to what has happened here. Acknowledge those changes, and then straight away I'm back in my happy land where I know the exact state of all my databases in the system, in all my environments. So that's a quick rundown of the traceability features that the DLM dashboard offers you. Further to this, I can click on this icon, and all the approvals, all those changes we audit and we save, and you can go and relive them and see what happened. And this shows you exactly when these changes went through the system, who did it in a brief summary. And again, I can go back to those changes and see how my schema evolved. And it's all about accountability, and it's all about traceability and letting you know what happened to your databases across your multiple environments.
Thanks, Tom. We had a quick question that came in from Felix about installation. Can this be installed on a VM?
There's no reason why it can't be installed on a VM as long as it's Windows.
And can you talk anything about the performance of the DLM dashboard with tens of thousands of objects and made by, many frequent changes by a development team, maybe hundreds of changes?
Yeah, so the DLM dashboard uses a DDL trigger that is installed on the server that you are monitoring. And that's very lightweight. It just puts the as things change, it puts them into a table on that server. So that's no problem. And then at our end on the dashboard code, we pull that data to populate our app. And again, in theory, that works well. And we've recently done some performance testing, and we're sort of in the area of a change every 13 seconds on an AdventureWorks database is easily dealt with. That's our official line to what we support. I guess we can go, that's certainly not the cut-off point. We can probably be more efficient than that, but that's what we've tested against.
Great. So again, this is available on our website today, redgate.com. Is a free edition, so go ahead and give it a try, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Okay.
Again, if there's any questions we didn't get to throughout the webinar today, we'll follow up with email. I know we're running short on time. You can always get in touch with us at dlm@redgate.com. We also have a lot of information, free articles, additional webinars, and all our free trials are at redgate.com/products/DLM. And we mentioned this briefly earlier about some of the training courses we have around source controlling databases, continuous integration for databases, and automating deployments. That's at redgate.com/DLM training. In addition, we're offering consulting services to help get this set up in your environments as well. You can find us on Twitter at Redgate.